Let's talk about humility. What is humility? Is it just the opposite of pride? Kind of. Because what is pride? Pride is thinking that you're the greatest, right? Pride is thinking that you know best. There are two different kinds of pride. There's that kind, and there's like pride in, pride in your kids when they do something. You're so proud of them. That's good. That is a good thing. To be proud of your work is a good thing. It means that hopefully you've tried your best with whatever it is. But it's also dangerous. Because once you think that your work is the best there is, well, that's when the evil pride comes in. See, that kind of pride is the most deadly sin there is. Because it blinds you to everything else. A proud person can be a very dangerous person. Because they truly believe that anything they're doing is right. They think that everything they're doing is right. I mean, with some people, it's not as bad as others, but there have been some very prideful, evil people. Because why? Because they're not thinking any further than themselves and their own beliefs. They can't admit that perhaps they're wrong. See, there's no other option in their eyes. They are right because they know that they're right. Not because of any proof of anything or because they have, evidence showing that they're right, but they believe that they're right. And don't get me wrong, having a belief that you are right in some situations is not a bad thing at all. But if you do that for everything, we're not here to talk about pride, we're here to talk about its opposite of humility. And what humility is. You see, humility is the opposite of that pride because humility, true humility, is not just thinking that you're not good at anything. True humility is not saying that everything you do is bad. It's not saying anything lesser about yourself. True humility is knowing your strengths and your weaknesses and being okay with them. True humility is being able to paint the world's greatest painting in the ever, and then thanking God because it is the most beautiful painting ever, and thanking God that it exists. And thanking God for, maybe the opportunity that somebody else would have made it. Or imagine that you have just made the most beautiful chair and then enjoying that chair, but having no more or less pride than if somebody else had made it. And just loving the thing for what it is. Pride is it's really easy to nail down what it is, but humility is much harder. You see, with God, we have so much pride. How often do we just do what we want to? That's pride. Every single sin you've ever committed, that's pride. Whenever you sin, you're saying, God, I know more than you. Or, God, I know what would make me more happy than you. See, even though we're not the creator, and we don't know what we were made for, we like to think we do. We like to think that we're the center of the universe. And don't get me wrong, I am the exact same way. I'm not saying this to belittle anybody. I am the exact same way. Humility is realizing that there's so much more to everything. Humility is coming in second place and realizing that you did a really good job. And not holding a grudge for the person who came in first, but thanking the Lord for them, for their abilities. Humility is listening to the most beautiful music in the world and thanking God that it exists and thanking God for those people who have the talent to make it. But it's so much more than that. Today's world tells you to have pride in your work, and there's nothing wrong with having pride in your work. But remembering where it all came from, where all of your talents came from. They didn't come from just yourself. They didn't just come from hard work. Our talents are a gift from God. Our treasures are a gift from God. This time on earth is a gift from God. It can be so often to look at everything in our lives and just think, this is mine. I can't spare $5 because I need that $5. I can't help you this Thursday, I have better things to do. Or I can't spend time with you. I'm far too busy. We seem to be under the impression that this time that God has given us is ours, to stamp with our seal of, this is Cody's time. At 4 o'clock until 8 o'clock the next day, that is Cody's time. That's what we've been led to believe. That nothing is more important at that time than that time. That belongs to us. And if we choose to give it to somebody else, well, then they better be giving us something back. Pride is thinking we need compensation for everything. Humility is giving of those things, our time, talent, and treasure, freely. And recognizing that we're not the center of the universe. We're not the greatest at everything, and that's okay. There will always be somebody better than you at something, and that's okay. One example I can think of is losing a baseball game or something. The people who just seem like they don't really care at the end of it. Maybe it's because that baseball game's not the whole world to them. And that's okay, because it shouldn't be. As long as they tried their hardest, they know in their hearts that they tried their hardest. And that's all they can do. And they thank God for that. Yeah, they'll go back to work, they'll practice to try and become better. But once you're trying to become better just so people recognize you, that's pride. That's putting the focus on yourself. But if you're trying to make yourselves better for the team or for the enjoyment of the fans, but not for yourself, for your own personal vainglory, then that's humility. And don't get me wrong, I am saying to not focus on yourself as much as we all do. There are times when you need to worry about yourself. You know? The order of importance is still God and our relationship with Him, ourselves making sure that we're healthy, our spouses, and then our kids, and then our jobs. But we need to not worry so much about everything. You know, it's extremely hard for some people because their entire lives they've known what's going on at all times. And it's so hard to get over that. It is so hard to get over us wanting to know what's going on and us wanting to feel like we're in control. But humility is giving that up to God and saying, God, I would really like to know what's going on. I'd really like to be in control of the situation. But I give it to you. I give this day of work to you. Not for my own self-gain, but for your glory. And doing everything to the maximum of your ability, not for yourself, but for God's glory and for the love of Him. Because you see, we think that if we give something to somebody, we now have less. And in one sense, that's true. But if we give something to God, He will never be outgiven. As long as it's given with proper intent. And I'll tell you what that means in a second, but let me say that again. God will never be outgiven as long as we're giving God with the proper intent. If we're just giving God something in order to get something back out of it greater, I don't know. Something about that just doesn't sit right with me. mean, I'm not God, I don't know. It's still better to give God something than to not. But just like those Pharisees who, when they would fast, they would wear sackcloth and torn clothes and they'd make themselves look dirty. So then they appeared to be fasting. Amen, I say to you, they have received their reward. You see, they were prideful. They were trying to do all this stuff for their own glory. Like, look at how good I am. And there's the other story about the Pharisees who went into the church, and there was some guy in the back with his face to the ground. And he walks up to the front. And he's like, "Thank God that I'm not like that sinner." And he goes up to the front of the church and he starts saying how great he is. When that person just lying there on the ground was showing true humility. He was giving himself to the Lord. He was lying prostrate at his feet. He was lying down at his feet. Lord, I do not deserve to look upon you. And really realizing that we don't. We don't deserve heaven. There's nothing we can do to deserve heaven. Humility is recognizing that and thanking God for everything that He's given us. And using those things that He's given us not for ourselves, but for Him. If I hand you a hammer and say, "Build me a house," then I would hope you would make me a house, but how often do we just take that hammer and go do our own thing with it? God gives us our talents. And He wants us to use them. He doesn't want us to pretend they're not there. He doesn't want you to hide them underneath the basket. God wants you to use those because He's given them to you. If you get a gift, you open it and you use the thing. But it can be so hard not to base your self-worth in those gifts or in the things that you have or in the relationships you have with others. True humility is being who you are with or without all that stuff. True humility is not being attached to every little thing in your life. And if God asks something of you, freely giving it to Him and trusting that He's going to do something great with it. And even if we never see it in our lifetimes, knowing that we have done something that God wants us to do. Humility is giving somebody a water bottle who is thirsty and not saying, "God, I'm so good," but realizing that you have just worked as part of his plan for that person. And realizing that God is so good. Even to those with nothing, he gives life. It can be kind of funny when you're actually really being humble in a moment and you recognize it. And then you can have the temptation to be proud in that moment of like, wow, I'm being really humble. It's not a bad thing to realize that you've done something and that you're acting humble. But then don't throw it away and just go tell the world about it, you know? I'm saying this next part not because of how great I am, but how simple it can be to change your mindset into humility. You know, if somebody sneezes, I like to say bless you, but quietly, just to myself. And genuinely making that a prayer of God, bless this person. There's nothing wrong. I mean, if we're the only two in the room, I'm going to say bless you, but doing little things out of love for those other people. And sometimes knowing that you won't get thanked, or knowing that you won't get anything in return. St. Therese of Lisieux, someone who I am very fond of, but honestly haven't prayed through, haven't asked for her intercession. Honestly, haven't even thought of for a long time. She did this great thing. She would do everything She would do small things with great love. She would do everything for her sisters in the convent with great love. Simple things such as washing the dishes or cleaning laundry. Doing those simple things with great love. We don't always have to wash dishes and proclaim to your spouse, hey, look at this, look what I've done. Instead, you can just do those things out of love for your spouse. That can be hard because we're so used to, I mean, it feels good to be thanked, right? It feels good to be told that we're appreciated. Those aren't bad things to feel that way. Like I said, pride in and of itself is not a bad thing, but once that becomes the center of your attention, then it is dangerous. See, I used to deal with the false pride, and I still do often, of when somebody would tell me that I did a good job, I'd say, no, I could have done so much better. Or when I used to play piano, and somebody would say, oh, that's really good, I'd say, no, I messed up so much, it was awful, I hated it. And I mean, at the time, that's genuinely how I felt. It felt like it was awful. Like it could have been so much better. But the humble thing in those situations would have been, even though you think contrary, to say, thank you. I really appreciate that. You know, maybe it wasn't perfect the way I wanted it to sound, but to them it could have been beautiful. There was there was a time in when I was at DSU. A couple of times the Newman went to the prison in Sioux Falls, and we would go to one mass with the inmates, and then they would all leave before we got the chance to we kind of got the chance to talk to them for a little bit, but that was about it. And before mass there was a piano, and I sat down and I was just like playing some stuff. It was just random little songs. I didn't really know any full songs, so I was just going back and forth between a bunch of little ones. And then the priest walked in, and I was like, all right, I better stop. And I turned around, there was a bunch of people in there. I was like, oh, whoops. They probably would have rather been talking. And then we went to mass and everything, and then we talked to them for a little bit, and then we turned around and we left. And we sat down for dinner, and we were all sat around the table at Cracker Barrel, and our Newman director Kim told me, Cody, one of the inmates came up to me and he said he hasn't heard music before church in like 15 years or more. And I wasn't doing it for them really. I was doing it for myself because I saw a piano and because I wanted to play it. But God took that. He knows, God knows very well that I like to just play piano when I see one. And he took that and he used it to work on me and my heart. And he also used it for that inmate, for the person who hasn't heard a piano in so long. And that hit me. I could have sat there and been like, oh yeah, I'm really good at piano, aren't I? Maybe I should go again. No. That one that one stung. That one sat with me. Because even though once again I know that I could have done better, I was able to just thank God for that moment. To thank God that He used me so profoundly and just in a beautiful way for that person. Had I just started sitting down and playing piano in hopes that someone would come up and say, hey, good job, well, then there, I would have gotten my reward. I would have said thanks, and that would have been that. I don't know if I don't really know if this is humility or not. Maybe just simplicity, but my favorite time of all wasn't like winning football games. It wasn't graduating. It wasn't getting recognized for anything. The favorite moment in my life, I guess there are two of them. One of them was sitting downstairs at my friend's house, and we were just chatting the whole night away. We were just talking. And my other favorite moment in my entire life was sitting at Broomtree. It was at a D camp. And we were at a bonfire that night. Someone was playing guitar. And this girl sat behind me, and I sat on the ground, and she just played with my hair. And that's it. We didn't say much, we didn't do anything. We just sat there listening to the guitar. And she played with my hair. And it can be easy to think, oh, well, that's just because you didn't win the football game, the one where you snapped the ball over Grant's head twice. And, if you would have won that, maybe that would have. No, it wouldn't have. See, because in that moment, I wasn't trying to. In either of those moments, I wasn't trying to gain anything. When you just let God do what God's gonna do, it's so easy to just be at peace, to love what's happening. Maybe not to understand it. Like this entire year, I've had no idea what's been going on this year. But thanking God for it all the same. And God, I don't know what next year's going to be like, but thank you for this time right now. Not thinking that I'm in control, not, trying to set up everything the way I want it to, but just letting God be in control of every day. And there are people who that would be extremely hard for. I'd argue for most people that would be very hard. It's genuinely nice to have an idea of where you're going. It's so difficult for some people, for a lot of people, to just be led, to just go, to trust that God is going to take you where He wants you to realize that we do fail Him, but we thank God for those failures too, because they've made us a better person. They've made us a stronger person in the end. Look at St. Peter. Not Peter. St. Paul. And look at everything he did when he was still Saul. He wasn't proud of it. He was very humble about those things. Granted, if you had done what he did, hopefully you wouldn't be proud about it, but he had that humility that Judah didn't. He had that humility to know that he had done awful things, but he had the trust in God. And the same with Peter. They both had the trust in God that God would still work through them. They didn't give up. They didn't just quit because they couldn't see the end goal. They didn't quit because they weren't in control. No, they worked harder. They loved harder. They tried harder for Christ, not for themselves, not for their own glory, not because of anything that they could do themselves, but because of what God could do through them. They realized that. All of the saints throughout history realized that God can do so much more through them. And they weren't just doing things for themselves. They weren't just doing things because they thought that, oh, if I do this, this, and this, one day people are going to remember me. People are going to put up statues of me with little animals. I think it was St. Francis who was rich. I think he got a lot of money from his parents. And what did he do? He sold everything he had. Lived a simple life. He had that trust in God that God would take care of him. In what ways do we not believe in God? In what ways do we not recognize that He is in control? In what ways do we not trust in Him? In what ways do we not allow Him to work in our lives? In what ways do we see ourselves as better than others? Where are the things that you are most proud of in your life? What are those things that you hold in high esteem? And can you honestly say that you would be the same person without them? I think it's important to remember that some people with depression think that they're not good at anything. I honestly feel like people with depression or anxiety can be very humble people. Why? Because they think nothing of themselves. Literally. They think of themselves as nothing. That is the dangerous kind of humility, if ever there was one. Remember, true humility is recognizing your strengths and your weaknesses and being able to call them out. I realize that one of my strengths is that sometimes I can be funny. One of my weaknesses is that a lot of times, more often than I should, I try to be funny. And I'm not saying those to just tell you that I'm great at things. I'm telling you this because there's nothing wrong with being good at something, and there's nothing wrong with knowing that you're good at something. But remember, once you're trying to do those things for your own rewards, for your own glory, for your own attention, once you get those things, once you get that attention, amen, I say to you, you have received your reward. When was the last time you went out and shoveled the walkway, not because you were told, but just because you loved someone? When was the last time you cleaned up around the house out of love for your parents or out of love for your spouse? When was the last time you cleaned up your kids' toys and didn't bring it up to them? You just simply cleaned it up because you love your family. Or when was the last time that you saw that coworker who just grinds your gears and you prayed for them? You just said a little Hail Mary or an Our Father. Or if it wasn't a rote prayer, you just thank God for that person because they're helping you grow as a person. Pray for other people. Pray for those who you love. More importantly, pray for those who you can't get along with. And remember that those people are also Christ. They are still our brothers and sisters. And then if you pray for them, you don't have to tell them. If you wash the dishes for somebody, you don't have to tell them. If you make food for somebody and just deliver it to their house without them knowing, you don't have to go out and say, hey, look at this great thing I did. You don't really see many humble people on TV because that wouldn't make for a very interesting television show. Or that would make for a great movie. Because it would be your main character just acting like they're not, just trying to help others out. It would be the main character being selfless, instead of selfish. It would be them putting the needs of others first while just putting enough time for themselves. Just remember that humility is recognizing the gifts that were given to you and using them not for yourself, but for others and for God. Remember to pray for others, those whom you love and those who you don't get along with. And remembering that those people are still God's kids. They're still God's children. And they have issues just the same as you. They have problems the same as you. They grew up in a different world than you did. You don't know what they went through. You don't. Even if it's a classmate or somebody you grew up with, you don't know how they react to situations in their own mind. You don't know how different it is in their head than it is in yours. I love you.